The bustling Atlanta International Airport was experiencing one of its typical busy mornings, with travelers rushing to and fro, dragging their wheelie bags across the polished floors and checking their phones for flight updates. Among this sea of hurried faces was Air Force General Robert Wilson, a distinguished military veteran with over 3 decades of service to his country. Unlike most days when he wore his impressive military uniform, decorated with medals and badges that told stories of his courage and dedication, today General Wilson had chosen to travel in comfortable civilian clothes, a crisp blue polo shirt, khaki pants, and a simple black jacket. He'd learned over the years that sometimes it was nice to blend in with the crowd, to be just another traveler making his way home. The general had taken this same flight route to Washington, D.C. countless times before. It was almost like a second home to him now, given how often he needed to attend important meetings at the Pentagon. As he made his way through the airport, his calm presence stood out, not because he was trying to draw attention, but because he carried himself with the quiet confidence that comes from years of leadership. The first-class check-in counter wasn't particularly crowded that morning, but there was still a small line of about 5 or 6 people. General Wilson took his place at the end of the queue, pulling out his ticket and military ID from his leather wallet. He watched as a young mother ahead of him struggled to keep her toddler entertained while checking in her bags, and he couldn't help but smile, remembering similar moments with his own children years ago. That's when he noticed Mr. Richard Parker, a man in an expensive-looking gray suit, walking up to join the line behind him. Parker was clearly a frequent flyer. You could tell by his matching designer luggage set and the way he impatiently checked his gold watch every few seconds. He had that air about him that suggested he was used to getting his way, the type who probably spent more time in airport lounges than his own living room. The line moved forward slowly but steadily. General Wilson could hear Parker behind him, talking loudly on his phone about some business merger that apparently couldn't wait until he reached his destination. The general didn't mind. He'd learned patience in his years of service, and there was something almost amusing about watching people get worked up over these small delays. What General Wilson didn't know was that this ordinary morning was about to become anything but ordinary. As he took another step forward in line, he had no idea that in just a few minutes, this quiet corner of the airport would become the stage for an incident that would soon capture national attention and spark important conversations across the country. He stood there, boarding pass in hand, thinking about the meeting he had scheduled later that day, completely unaware that his next interaction would test not just his patience, but his dignity and strength of character in ways he hadn't faced in years. The security cameras above silently recorded everything, their lenses about to capture a moment that would soon be seen by millions. The morning sun streamed through the airport's massive windows, creating long shadows across the terminal floor. General Wilson adjusted the strap of his carry-on bag, going over his mental checklist for the trip. Behind him, Parker had finally ended his phone call, but the businessman's agitation seemed to be growing with each passing minute. The air felt thick with tension, like the calm before a storm. This was just another Monday morning at Atlanta International Airport, or at least that's how it seemed. But sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as ordinary days, and this day was about to become one that neither General Wilson, Mr. Parker, nor any of the witnesses present would ever forget. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as both shocking and sadly familiar. As General Wilson stepped forward to present his ticket at the first-class counter, Mr. Parker suddenly pushed past him, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The movement was so abrupt that several other passengers gasped in surprise. "Excuse me," Parker announced loudly, his voice carrying across the check-in area, "but I believe you're in the wrong line." He didn't even bother to look directly at General Wilson as he spoke, instead addressing his comments to the air as if the general wasn't even there. "This is the first-class line." He emphasized each word as if speaking to someone who didn't understand English well. The airline attendant at the counter, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Chen who had worked there for over 15 years, immediately recognized what was happening. She'd seen this kind of behavior before, though it never failed to make her stomach twist with discomfort. "Sir," she began, trying to address Parker, "everyone in this line has the correct tickets." But Parker wasn't interested in listening. He waved his hand dismissively, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Look," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, I'm a Platinum member with over 1 million miles. I fly this route every week, and I know how things work here." He gestured vaguely toward General Wilson. "Clearly, some people have wandered into the wrong area. It happens all the time." The other passengers in line shifted uncomfortably. A young woman near the back pulled out her phone and began recording, her hands shaking slightly. An elderly gentleman shook his head in disapproval, while a businesswoman in a navy suit crossed her arms and stared daggers at Parker's back. Through all of this, General Wilson remained perfectly still, his military training evident in his composed stance. He hadn't said a word yet, but there was a quiet dignity in his silence that made Parker's behavior seem even more outrageous. The general's expression remained neutral, though anyone looking closely might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the only visible sign that he'd registered the insult at all. "Sir," Mrs. Chen tried again, her voice firmer this time, "I'm going to have to ask you to wait your turn. Everyone in this line has a first-class ticket." She looked apologetically at General Wilson, but Parker stepped even closer to the counter, practically blocking the general from view. "Listen," Parker said, his voice getting louder. "I don't mean to make a scene here, but there's clearly been a mistake. Some people," he glanced back at General Wilson for the first time, his meaning crystal clear, "obviously don't understand how things work in first class. I'm just trying to maintain the proper order here." By now, more phones had come out. The incident was being captured from multiple angles, though nobody knew yet how important these recordings would become. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by Parker's increasingly aggressive tone. The general still hadn't moved from his spot. He held his ticket and ID in one hand, waiting patiently as if this was just another minor delay in his day. His calm demeanor seemed to irritate Parker even more, who was growing red in the face from his own self-righteous anger. "I want to speak to a supervisor right now," Parker demanded, slapping his hand on the counter. "This is ridiculous. There are standards to maintain. I pay good money for first class, and I expect certain things." He looked around at the gathering crowd as if seeking support, but found only disapproving faces staring back at him. Mrs. Chen was already reaching for her phone to call her supervisor, though not for the reasons Parker assumed. She'd worked in customer service long enough to know when a situation was about to escalate, and she could see in Parker's eyes that he wasn't going to back down easily. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other check-in counters had gone quiet as staff and passengers alike watched the scene unfold. Nobody knew it yet, but in just a few moments, everything was about to change. The supervisor was already on their way, and Parker's world was about to be turned upside down in a way he never could have expected. The crowd at the first-class check-in counter had grown larger now, with travelers stopping to watch the unfolding drama. Some people whispered among themselves, while others continued recording on their phones. The air felt heavy with tension, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. General Wilson maintained his dignified silence, standing straight but relaxed, his years of military training evident in his calm demeanor. It was the kind of composure that only comes from facing far worse situations than an angry businessman at an airport. His eyes, though, told a different story. They held decades of similar experiences, each one leaving its mark, but never breaking his spirit. Mr. Parker, on the other hand, seemed to feed off the attention of the growing crowd. His voice grew louder with each passing moment, perhaps mistaking the onlookers' silence for support. "This is exactly what's wrong with society today," he declared, gesturing wildly. "Nobody respects proper procedures anymore. When I started flying first class 20 years ago, this sort of thing would never have happened." A young couple who had been waiting in line exchanged glances. The woman pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. Later, it would turn out she was live-tweeting the entire incident. Her husband shook his head in disbelief, muttering under his breath about how some people seemed stuck in the past. Mrs. Chen, the airline attendant, kept her professional composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she dialed for a supervisor. She'd dealt with difficult customers before, but something about this situation felt different. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity of General Wilson or the palpable anger radiating from Parker, but she knew this wasn't going to end like a typical customer service dispute. "Sir," she tried one more time, addressing Parker, "if you could just wait your turn." "Wait my turn?" Parker interrupted. his face turning an even deeper shade of red. "I've earned my status with this airline. I won't stand here and watch while you let just anyone walk into first class." He pulled out his phone, fumbling with it in his anger. "I'm going to call corporate about this. I know people there, important people." An elderly woman in the crowd spoke up, her voice shaking with emotion. "Young man," she said, though Parker was well into his 50s, "you should be ashamed of yourself." Several others nodded in agreement, but Parker seemed beyond caring about public opinion. The tension continued to build as more passengers gathered around. A group of pilots walking past slowed down, sensing something was wrong. One of them narrowed his eyes as he looked at General Wilson, then whispered something to his colleagues. They stayed nearby, watching the situation carefully. Through all of this, General Wilson hadn't moved from his spot. His only reaction was a slight softening around his eyes when he noticed a young child in the crowd looking scared by all the commotion. He gave the child a reassuring smile, the kind that said everything would be okay. Parker noticed this interaction and scoffed loudly. "Oh, now we're playing nice with the children. This is exactly what I mean. This is a premium service area, not a public park." His words drew audible gasps from the crowd, and several more phones came out to record his behavior. The minutes seemed to stretch on endlessly as everyone waited for the supervisor to arrive. The regular bustle of the airport continued in the background, announcements over the PA system, the distant sound of luggage carts, the hum of countless conversations, but around the first-class counter, time seemed to stand still. A security guard had appeared at the edge of the crowd, watching carefully but not intervening yet. He spoke quietly into his radio, presumably updating someone about the situation. More airline staff had gathered nearby, their faces showing a mix of concern and anticipation. The air felt electric with tension. Everyone could sense that something big was about to happen, though none of them could have predicted exactly how this situation would unfold. The supervisor was making their way through the terminal, about to arrive at a scene that would soon make headlines across the country and change several lives forever. This wasn't just about a first-class ticket anymore. It had become something much bigger. A moment that would shine a spotlight on the kind of everyday discrimination that too many people still faced. And unknown to Parker, his next few actions would not only cost him his job, but would also make him an unwitting example of why such behavior had no place in modern society. The airport terminal fell eerily quiet as the supervisor, Mr. Thompson, arrived at the first-class counter. He was a tall man with graying hair and 30 years of airline experience under his belt. As he approached, Parker immediately straightened his expensive suit and prepared to launch into his complaint. Finally, Parker exclaimed, "Someone who can sort this out properly. Sir, you need to." But Mr. Thompson wasn't looking at Parker. His eyes had immediately gone to General Wilson, who still stood quietly holding his ticket and ID. The supervisor's expression changed instantly from professional concern to one of recognition and deep respect. "General Wilson, sir," Thompson said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent crowd. "I apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced this morning." He straightened his posture automatically, years of his own military service showing through. Parker's mouth dropped open. The color drained from his face so quickly that some onlookers worried he might faint. His expensive briefcase slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the terminal like a gunshot. What?" Parker stammered, looking back and forth between the supervisor and General Wilson. The general simply handed his military ID and first-class ticket to Thompson, who examined them with visible reverence. 30 years of distinguished service, Thompson announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Combat veteran, currently serving as one of the highest-ranking officers in our Air Force. He turned to face Parker directly. And yes, sir, he is very much in the correct line. The crowd had grown even larger now, and dozens of phones captured Parker's transformation from aggressive businessman to a man who looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. Someone in the back started clapping, and soon the whole terminal erupted in applause. A young boy tapped on his mother's sleeve and pointed at General Wilson. "Mom," he whispered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "is he a real hero?" The mother nodded, tears in her eyes, as she watched the scene unfold. Several veterans in the crowd had stepped forward, offering quiet salutes to General Wilson, who acknowledged each one with a respectful nod. The pilots who had been watching earlier approached as well, expressing their gratitude for his service. Parker stood frozen, his face now shifting from pale white to deep red, not from anger this time, but from shame. His company logo on his laptop bag was clearly visible in the videos being recorded, and social media was already buzzing with the incident. Several people in the crowd were openly Googling his company's name. "Sir," Parker finally managed to stammer out, addressing General Wilson directly for the first time. I didn't know." His voice trailed off weakly. The general's decades of service, his sacrifices for his country, his leadership role, none of it should have mattered. The wrong had nothing to do with his rank, and everything to do with basic human dignity. General Wilson finally spoke, his voice calm and measured, carrying the weight of wisdom earned through years of leadership. "Knowledge isn't the issue here, Mr. Parker. Respect is, and respect isn't reserved for uniforms or rank. It's a basic courtesy we owe to all people, regardless of how they look or what they wear." The terminal fell silent again as his words sank in. Several people nodded in agreement, while others looked down, perhaps reflecting on their own biases. Mrs. Chen, the airline attendant, wiped away a tear as she began processing General Wilson's check-in. The security footage and passenger videos were already spreading across social media platforms. Within hours, this incident would become more than just an airport confrontation. It would spark important conversations in homes, offices, and classrooms across the country about prejudice, assumptions, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Parker's world was crumbling around him as he stood there, his own first-class ticket feeling worthless in his hands. He had no way of knowing yet that this moment would cost him far more than just his pride. His company's logo, clearly visible in all those viral videos, would ensure that this incident would have consequences far beyond this morning at the airport. The aftermath of the confrontation spread through the airport like wildfire. Within minutes, videos of the incident were being shared across every social media platform imaginable. People waiting at their gates pulled out their phones to show their seatmates what had happened just a few terminals away. The hashtag #FirstClassGeneral was already trending. A young tech-savvy passenger had managed to capture the entire incident in high definition, including Parker's discriminatory behavior and the powerful moment of revelation. The crystal-clear audio picked up every condescending word, every dismissive gesture, and most importantly, General Wilson's dignified response about respect. "Look at this," one passenger said to another while waiting for their coffee at the airport cafe. The company logo on his bag and laptop is perfectly visible. The coffee shop was buzzing with conversations about what had happened, with people sharing different videos taken from various angles. Meanwhile, back at the check-in counter, other passengers who had witnessed the incident were approaching General Wilson to offer their support. A Vietnam veteran with gray hair and wearing a veteran's cap made his way through the crowd. When he reached the general, he stood at attention and saluted, tears in his eyes. "Sir," the elderly veteran said, his voice thick with emotion, "I served in '69. What happened here today? Well, it reminds me that we still have battles to fight at home." General Wilson returned his salute and reached out to shake his hand, creating another powerful moment that quickly made its way onto social media. Parker had retreated to a nearby seat, his face buried in his phone as he watched his professional life unravel in real time. His company's social media accounts were being flooded with comments and messages. The airline's customer service department was receiving countless tweets and emails about the incident, with many people calling for Parker to be banned from future flights. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip had witnessed the entire scene. Their teacher, seeing an important learning opportunity, gathered them in a quiet corner to discuss what they had observed. "Remember this moment," she told them. "Sometimes the biggest heroes aren't the ones who shout the loudest, but the ones who maintain their dignity in the face of disrespect." The airline staff had switched into high gear, with the supervisor personally ensuring General Wilson's check-in process was completed smoothly. Other staff members were documenting the incident, knowing it would require a formal report. Mrs. Chen, still at her counter, received a quiet word of thanks from the general that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Outside the airport, news vans were already pulling up. Local reporters had gotten wind of the story and were rushing to cover it. Inside, passengers continued to share the videos, adding their own eyewitness accounts in the comments sections. "My daughter works in HR," one woman remarked to her husband as they watched the scene. "She says something like this can end a career nowadays. Everything gets recorded, everything goes viral." Her husband nodded, still watching Parker, who seemed to be getting increasingly panicked messages on his phone. The company Parker worked for, a prestigious consulting firm, was about to face its own crisis. Their phone lines were lighting up with calls from journalists seeking comments. Their social media team was scrambling to craft a response that would distance the company from their employees' behavior. Several veterans in the terminal had formed an impromptu honor guard near General Wilson's gate. They weren't being showy about it, just standing quietly nearby, a silent statement of solidarity and respect. Other passengers noticed and kept a respectful distance, understanding the significance of the moment. As the morning wore on, the videos continued to spread. News websites were picking up the story, with headlines appearing on major news portals. Social media influencers were sharing the clips with their millions of followers, adding their own commentary about respect, dignity, and the consequences of prejudice. Parker finally received a call from his company's HR department. As he walked away to take it, his shoulders slumped in defeat. People could see him gesturing desperately, trying to explain himself. But in the age of viral videos and instant communication, some actions can't be explained away. The incident had become more than just an airport confrontation. It had transformed into a powerful moment that would be used in corporate training sessions, school discussions, and conversations about respect and dignity for years to come. And it all started because one man chose to judge another based on appearances, while another chose to respond with grace and dignity. By late afternoon, the airport incident had become national news. Major news networks picked up the story, running headlines like "First-Class Discrimination Backfires" and "General's Dignity Wins Hearts." The video clips had already been viewed millions of times across different platforms. General Wilson's flight had long since departed, but his impact lingered throughout the terminal. Airline staff shared how he had taken a moment before boarding to thank each of them personally, showing the same respect to the cleaning staff as he had to the supervisor. "That's what real leadership looks like," one baggage handler told another during their break. Parker's company didn't waste any time responding to the crisis. By 2 p.m., they had released an official statement. "We are aware of the incident involving one of our employees at Atlanta International Airport this morning. The behavior displayed goes against everything our company stands for. Effective immediately, the employee has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." The statement appeared on all their social media channels, but the public wasn't satisfied. Comments flooded in. "Administrative leave isn't enough." And "This shows who he really is when he thinks no one's watching." The company's stock price had even taken a small hit as the story continued to spread. In the airport's staff break room, employees gathered during their shifts to watch the news coverage. "You know what's amazing?" one custodian said to his co-workers. "The general never once raised his voice, never lost his cool. That's the kind of strength you can't buy with a first-class ticket." Local veterans groups began organizing outside the airport, holding signs supporting General Wilson and military service members. One sign read, "Respect is earned by actions, not bought with status." News cameras captured these peaceful gatherings, adding another layer to the story's coverage. Back at the consulting firm's headquarters, emergency meetings were being held. The HR department was flooded with emails from concerned clients and partners. Their biggest worry wasn't just the bad publicity, it was the genuine damage this incident could do to their company's relationships with military contractors and government agencies. Parker himself had become the subject of countless memes and social media posts. His face, captured so clearly in those viral videos, was everywhere. Some people online tried to defend him, saying everyone makes mistakes, but they were quickly overwhelmed by others pointing out that this wasn't a simple mistake, it was a revealing moment of character. By evening, several diversity and inclusion experts had been interviewed on news programs, using the incident as an example of ongoing discrimination in everyday life. "What makes this situation so powerful," one expert explained, "is that it shows both the problem and the solution. General Wilson's response gives us all a masterclass in handling discrimination with dignity. The airline's corporate office released their own statement, announcing a comprehensive review of their customer service policies and promising additional staff training. They also revealed that they would be inviting General Wilson to speak at their next employee training session if he was willing. Universities and corporate training departments started reaching out, requesting permission to use the video in their teaching materials. One professor of sociology wrote a viral thread explaining why this incident resonated with so many people. It's not just about first class versus coach, military versus civilian. It's about the everyday assumptions we make about people based on their appearance. Television talk shows were already booking guests to discuss the incident for their next day's programming. The story had touched a nerve, sparking conversations in homes and offices across the country about prejudice, respect, and the power of responding to hatred with dignity. Meanwhile, General Wilson's colleagues at the Pentagon had been fielding calls all day from media outlets requesting interviews. His office released a simple statement that reflected his character. General Wilson appreciates the public's concern, but wishes to focus attention on the larger issues of respect and dignity for all people, regardless of their rank or position. As night fell, the story was still trending online. Parents were showing the videos to their children, using them as teaching moments about character and respect. Teachers were already planning to discuss the incident in their classrooms the next day. What had started as one man's moment of prejudice had transformed into a powerful lesson about dignity, consequences, and the importance of treating everyone with respect. The incident would continue to have ripple effects in the days and weeks to come, but its immediate impact was clear. A powerful reminder that character reveals itself in moments of pressure and that true dignity often speaks loudest when it speaks softly. In the weeks following the airport incident, the impact continued to ripple through society in unexpected ways. Parker's company, after their initial statement about administrative leave, made their final decision. Following a thorough investigation and facing continued public pressure, they announced that Parker's position had been terminated. But the story didn't end with a simple firing. The company's CEO took things a step further, announcing a complete overhaul of their corporate culture. "This incident opened our eyes," she said in a press conference. "We're not just changing policies, we're changing hearts and minds." The incident had become a catalyst for change in unexpected places. Airlines across the country began updating their training programs. One major carrier created a new module specifically addressing unconscious bias, using carefully edited footage from the incident as a teaching tool. Flight attendants and gate agents reported that passengers seemed more mindful of their behavior, especially in first-class sections. Parker himself underwent a transformation that surprised many. After weeks of avoiding the public eye, he emerged with a written apology that seemed genuinely heartfelt. "I spent these past weeks reflecting deeply," he wrote. "My behavior that day showed me something about myself that I didn't want to see. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for the chance to do better." He backed up his words with actions, enrolling in extensive diversity training programs. He even requested a meeting with General Wilson to apologize in person, though his request was directed through proper military channels out of respect for the general's position and privacy. General Wilson's response to the incident continued to impress people. When finally convinced to speak about it in a military leadership seminar, he focused not on the discrimination he faced, but on the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. "Leadership isn't about showing power," he explained to a packed auditorium. "It's about showing character, especially when it would be easier not to." The video of the incident found its way into training programs across different industries. Corporate offices used it to discuss workplace behavior. Schools incorporated it into lessons about respect and dignity. Police academies even added it to their training about keeping calm in tense situations. One middle school teacher shared how her students had been particularly moved by the story. They started a dignity project, looking for ways to combat discrimination in their own school. "The general taught us that sometimes the strongest response is a quiet one," one student explained during their presentation. The airline industry saw changes too. Several major carriers revised their first-class check-in procedures, not because of any flaw in their systems, but to ensure every passenger was treated with equal respect, regardless of their ticket class. Mrs. Chen, the check-in attendant from that day, was promoted to lead customer service trainer, sharing her insights about handling difficult situations with grace. The airport where it all happened installed a small plaque near the first-class counter. It didn't mention the incident specifically, but simply read, "Respect is a first-class quality available to everyone." Airport staff said it served as a daily reminder about the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Parker's story took another turn when he began volunteering with veteran organizations. At first, people were skeptical of his motives, but his commitment proved genuine. "I needed to understand the people I had disrespected," he explained to a local newspaper. "What I learned changed my life." The consulting firm that had fired Parker used the incident as a launching point for major internal changes. They'd hired diversity consultants, revised their hiring practices, and started a scholarship program for veterans pursuing business degrees. "Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to show us where we need to grow," their new HR director explained. General Wilson eventually agreed to give a series of talks about leadership and dignity, but with one condition: that they be free and open to the public. His speeches never focused on the airport incident, but instead on broader themes of respect, understanding, and the importance of seeing beyond appearances. 1 year after the incident, a reporter asked the general what lasting message he hoped people would take from what happened. His response was characteristically thoughtful. "In life, we can't always control how others treat us, but we can control how we respond." True dignity isn't about wearing the right clothes or having the right ticket. It's about treating every person with respect, even when they don't offer you the same. The story became part of a larger conversation about change and redemption. It showed that while actions have consequences, they can also lead to genuine transformation. From corporate boardrooms to school classrooms, the incident served as a powerful reminder that respect and dignity should never be considered premium services. They're basic human rights available to everyone, regardless of their seat assignment in life.